Hi, Facebook followers. This is Adrian Harris for Right On Consultant Agency, and it is 7:45. It is time for Say It Right Sundays, and we are starting part 2 of our series that is called It Is Written, part 2. Tonight we are going to discuss the brain. How is the brain a functioning part of writing? And we're actually going to talk about how writing and reading go together. Remember, this overall series is to kind of inform us or lead us to, these first two parts are leading us to the concept of literacy. Remember, I've spoken with you guys about you are not literate if you cannot read and write. The very simplest or the simplest definition for the word literacy is the ability to be able to read and write. So you must be functional, you must be able to do both in order to be considered a literate person. So this particular part of the series of It Is Written is going to show us how reading and writing and the brain go together. So I am super excited about tonight's series. I think it's awesome how all of this works together and how all of it goes together. Is a simple process on the outside, just in the sense of we do it so often we're not thinking about the mechanics behind how things are working. But guys, it is a very intricate process for us to be able to read and for us to be able to write. It's a very intricate process for us to be able to speak and then do all of those things well, clearly, at an average level where we can function in society, and then to go, to go beyond that and be, English majors, or to be people who absolutely love to read and can expound on various topics that we read, or to be able to speak various languages. So then you get into your broader, sciences, your broader literacy categories, which I don't know if we're going to get on them here. I am doing research, or I have done research on the kinds of literacy and how large of a category literacy is, because you can start out at your basic literacy, which we are going to get into on next week, which is part of the series, but it's part 3. So we are going to talk about basic literacy on next week. So, but literacy itself is big. It's very, very broad, and it can start out very, very small with your basic literacy concepts, but then it goes on to an extended, category, if you will, where we can actually take, like, I can be literate, a science literate, or computer literate, or you have what you call, what's another one, music literate, and you are an absolute expert in that particular category. So you are able to read and write music. You're able to comprehend music. You're able to probably compose music on your own. So that's how broad it can get, and then how specific at the same time, how narrow it can get as well. So this particular series is designed to give us a backdrop on literacy, and then we're going to get into the more disciplined literacy and what that looks like, and how we can become more disciplined in our literacy, not literary because it's beyond literary, in our literate, behavior, because you can become more literate. Even though all of us, or most of us, are probably literate, we can become more literate, and then it begins to narrow itself as we begin to fine-tune what interests us. So that's what I mean by, getting more literate. You just become more fine-tuned in one specific area, and then you become, more or less more disciplined in that particular category of literacy. And we're gonna talk about that. We're gonna talk about how to get there, because one thing it will help you do, especially if you are a teacher, is help your students in your particular course. So if you are a science teacher, then what this particular series can help you do is help your students understand science while they are in your science class, and then go on to help students understand math while they are in your math class, so on and so forth. So Remember last week, awesome time. I had an awesome time um, teaching on the subject. It is written, and we discussed the word written, that it is the past participle of the word write. And we went over what the definition of write is in its entirety, where we defined that the word write actually means to describe, prescribe, subscribe, record, and inscribe. I think that's all of them. And we broke each one of those words down, and we talked about how when you are writing, that is what you are doing. You're actually describing, which means you are perceiving, you are observing things, you are inscribing, you are engraving the information that you are writing down on your heart, or on your mind rather, because we're talking about how what we write impacts the mind. So it's going on to your brains. And remember, we talked about in the series before this that what we write down is actually being processed, and it brings it to the forefront of our mind. So we're going to get into what the forefront of our mind is, what it is called, how it functions, and then we're going to talk about how reading and writing plays into our frontal lobe. That's called our frontal lobe. So you're probably wondering, like, okay, so why is she talking about this? Well, it's helping me get an understanding on the process of writing. Can't have a writing company or a writing business without actually understanding writing beyond, I believe, just the grammar, the mechanics, the sentence structure. And I want to be able to know how writing functions, and then how does it impact the person who is writing. And then you have the other end of the spectrum with how what is written impacts the reader, because remember, reading and writing go together. We talked about on our last series as well that what is written must eventually be read, or is going to eventually be read, even if it's just read by the person that writes the original, whatever, the letter, the note, the short story. I'm sure all of us may have some things written down no one has seen but us. So, but it's still, we can still go back and read that information. So, that's the whole point of me going this route with this particular series, just to give you some foundational information again on what the word write actually means, so that you have an understanding of what you're actually performing and the various tasks you are performing when you write. We're recording information on our brains. We are inscribing information on our brains. We're prescribing. We are dictating to ourselves what needs to be done when we actually write information down. And just if you did not see last week's video, let me slow down. I suggest that you guys go and watch it. I enjoyed, just teaching the information, and I know that you guys will get, especially, I believe, educators, and then I believe people who actually like to write and are aspiring to write, whatever, newspaper articles, literature, whatever your heart desires to write. I believe it will help you understand what's actually going on, in the entire process of writing. Not the revise, edit, brainstorm process, but the actual science and mechanics behind what happens between our brains and our hands and our eyes. I mean, it's just such a full process. It's so much involved in writing beyond getting the letters and the words and the sentences and the paragraphs on the page. So that's why we are going this route. It's just so much more going on with us when we write, and I just want you guys to know that, so that I think we'll value writing more. I don't know if if writing is valued as much as it should be, especially in a generation where we're so technologically inclined and we can sit down and just type our information. We talked about last week how typing and writing don't have the same weight. You have some stuff that kind of has equal weight, but typing and writing do not have the same weight in on your brain, on your memory, on your being able to recall the information. I did our research and found out that they did a study on some college students who half of the class was asked to write, and then another half of the class was asked to type. And the kids who wrote down their notes were much more likely, and they remembered more of the information than the kids who actually typed their notes out for that particular class. And I think that's phenomenal. And I know we know that that happens, and just based off of the basic information that I talked about in series 2 of how physically writing information down triggers the brain to remember what you're writing down, but it also triggers your brain, and your brain has the function and ability to bring what is actually written down to the forefront of your mind. So that's why this series is important. What you actually write down is going to be able to come to the forefront of your mind, and you're going to have that information just, I won't say supernaturally, but I guess supernaturally recorded. It is recorded on your brain, just even based off the basic definition. To write means to record. So you are recording whatever you're writing down to be processed, in your memory. And I think that is awesome. So tonight's series is called The Brain. And I hope you guys saw the advertisements for. I actually enjoyed putting those together. I think they look really, really good. I know I'm going to repost them just so you guys, so they'll hit your timelines again at some point in this week to kind of keep our takeaways for this particular series in the forefront of your minds, or at least in your memory. So let's go ahead and get started. Part 2, the brain. Our first takeaway is that the cerebrum is divided into 4 lobes. And our cerebrum is the largest part of our brains. And I actually want to show you guys a picture of it. And so it kind of shapes from here on the outside, from the back here, all the way to the front, including our forefront. So it goes like this. So that's the picture. It's probably got a glare on it. It does. Let's see. There's kind of, and then guys, remember it's backwards. So that's kind of sort of a picture of it. But just like for your FYI, it's like this part of your brain all the way to the front here. And it looks like it's including like a little piece, like even coming down towards your nose area. So it does include that frontal lobe, the forefront of our minds. And why is this important? Well, the forefront of our minds is here in the frontal lobe. And this particular part of our brain is responsible for our personalities, our behaviors, our emotions. It's also responsible for judgment, planning, problem solving. And the one that's important for us in this particular series is that it is important for speech. And not only is it important for speech that was actually spoken, but it is important for speech that is written. So go ahead and note that we have 2 kinds of speeches. You have your spoken speeches, or your spoken speech component, and you have your written speech component. And this particular part that's controlled, or that's the frontal lobe, or your cerebrum, this part is called, the part that's responsible for speech is called your Broca's area. B-R-O-C-A, your Broca. So this is your Broca's area. And in this particular area, it's the most active just before we speak. So right before I said that sentence, my Broca, and it's like amazing because we're talking. I'm a talker. You get me on the phone and I feel like talking, I am going to talk. So it's just amazing to me that the Broca is like, when I'm talking, or when you're talking, or when someone is talking, it's constantly being active. It's constantly, doing its job, because it's most active before words are actually spoken. So this particular part of our brain, our Broca, again, it's responsible for speech. And then speech is broken down into 2 categories: what we actually speak, and then it's broken down into what we write, our writing abilities, our abilities to be able to write. And so here, there was a study done at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, Maryland. Shout out to Johns Hopkins. Where the Broca's, what they found was that the Broca's area may be writing the script. Now, this is the part that blew my mind. Your Broca's area may be writing the script, organizing the string of sounds that express the playwright's ideas. So what are the playwright's ideas? Whatever you're writing down. Remember, guys, we read what we are writing at some point. But when we write, it's such a interconnectedness between our words and our letters that the Broca's area is writing the script. Remember, it's most active before words are spoken. So as we're writing this information down, it's like our brain is organizing the strings of sounds that are going to express these ideas. So that's why it's easy for us. What's coming to mind is we sometimes write faster than our brains are processing the information. So when you go back and proofread your work, then what tends to happen sometimes is we've left words out, or we put in the wrong word when we were trying to say something else, because our brain is writing or working, especially if you're handwriting, even if you're typing, our brains are working much faster than our fingers are, whether we're typing or whether we're writing the information down. So your Broca's area, which is a part of your cerebrum, which is this part of your head, which includes your frontal lobe. Remember, our frontal lobe is where the information is coming to our frontal lobe, the forefront of our minds, when we write the information down. Just trying to kind of keep this thing organized because it's very scientific, and I don't want you guys to get lost. So the Broca's area is may be writing the script. They were careful with their wording, so I'm going to be careful with the same. They said that they may be writing the script, organizing the strings of sounds that express the playwright's ideas. So why are sounds important? Remember, when we learn alphabet, we learn the sounds to these alphabets. Why? So that we could sound out the words we were unfamiliar with. And hold on, I wrote some letters down and they fell off my table. Alright, so we know this is A, and it makes the sound of ah. A, ah, apple, apple. Okay. This is B. It's a little jack, but it's okay. Bear, build. And then this is C. Makes a sound. So when we are writing, our brain is putting all of these sounds together. So if we're writing cat, C-A-T, at, it's organizing these sounds so that we can actually speak the words. Excuse me, guys. So we can actually speak the words. And I think that is amazing how all of this goes together. So imagine somebody who cannot read, who has not learned that equals cat, and possibly how their brain is not processing the string of sounds, so they have a hard time speaking and reading the words that are on the page. Does that make sense? I hope that's making sense to you guys. It cannot organize the strings of sounds it does not know. So when we're learning a new language, and we have to learn, I guess maybe Spanish or French, and we have to become more familiar with how the sounds of that particular language works, then our brains are trying to organize the sounds, and the more comfortable we come with even our ability to understand what we're writing and how it translates into another language, because the words are the same. I'm trying to think of a Spanish word. Nuevo. Okay, so when our brains are organizing those strings of sounds in our brains, and the more familiar we are with, I think, what we're actually writing down, then the easier our brain is able to organize those sounds. Again, if I don't know that this is then my brain is not going to be able to string those sounds together. It's almost like it's a foreign language to the brain. It doesn't recognize this as a sound or the proper sound, which may be why kids are confusing. You know, when you have a kid that's reading and they are calling, maybe they see, what's the one that's, I don't even know one that's often, mishandled. Any like C word, they're going to say cat if it's 3 letters, because, or if it's cap, they may say cat because that's the only C-A-T-P. Those words are mixed up because they don't know any other words. Those are the only ones they're familiar with, so they miscall words if they are a struggling reader and they haven't learned all of the sounds. So Again, our Broca's area may be writing the script, organizing the strings of sounds that express our ideas. All right. So the Broca is the middleman. So you have the temporal, which is the part of our brain that devises a plan for speaking. You have the Broca, which is organizing the script. And you have what you call the motor cortex, which it controls the movement of the mouth. Temporal, devising the plan for speaking. Broca, writing the script. Your motor cortex comes in and controls the movement of our mouths, which makes the sound. So apple. We got long A's, short A's, all of this good stuff. Cat. So my motor cortex just control the movement of my mouth to be able to speak those words. This may not be exciting to y'all. It's exciting to me to know that all of this is going on while I'm talking to you guys. Like, it goes on so fast and so quickly. We don't even have time to think about what's actually happening and processing here and coming out here and what's going on. Like a well-oiled machine, our vehicles, we don't have time to think about how the steering wheel and the brakes and the engine and all of that stuff is connected and working. It just works. And that's the same thing with us and our ability to speak and write. It just works, but there is some mechanics and the science behind it. So that's just what I'm sharing with you guys concerning the brain. So the information we write is going to the forefront of our minds, the frontal lobe of our brains, where the Broca's area is, which is organizing these strings of sounds that express our ideas. So if you have somebody, I believe here's a strategy for you. If you have somebody who is struggling to read, get them to write the information. Teach them the sounds and then get them to write the information down. This is going to help with their speech. I hope speech therapists are using a combination of reading and writing. I have no clue what they do. I'm sure they are reading and writing, and I hope they are, because the two just go together. As we are writing, our Broca's area is organizing those sounds so that we are able to speak those words. So we can take that strategy home. If you are teaching a child to read, have them also write at the same time. Maybe take their favorite book, maybe just the first sentence, and have them write down that first sentence of the Three Little Pigs. 3 little pigs built a house. Have them write that down so they'll be able to see the words, perceive, observe, describe, what they're writing down or what is written. And then their brain is helping their brain organize the strings of sounds that are associated with those words. So now we see how reading and writing are so interconnected. As we are writing, our brains are organizing the sounds that are associated with the words that we are writing. So stroke patients can write. They need to be writing if they can. People who are having a hard time learning how to read, once they learn those sounds, they can be writing these words down, and their brain is going to organize these sounds, and then I believe it's just going to begin to flow a whole lot easier for them, because your brain is now having to organize the sounds associated with these words, if that makes sense. I believe it makes sense. All right, so what does this have to do with reading? Our takeaway number 2. Actually, takeaway number 3, our takeaway number 2 was the frontal lobe is responsible for language, which we're going to get to. So we'll make that takeaway number 3. Takeaway number 2, the brain is prepared to speak what is written. So what does this have to do with reading? The brain is prepared to speak what is written down. So again, the brain is organizing the sounds associated with the words that are written. So speech, we talked about, has 2 parts, speaking and writing. Located in our Broca's area, located in our frontal lobe, that's located within the cerebellum, which is this area, like from the back of your head all the way to the front. Quick recap. There's a difference between speech and writing. So what is language? If the brain is prepared to speak what is written and our frontal lobe is responsible, this part here is responsible for language. What is language? Well, language breaks down into those same two categories. Language is sometimes speech. Language, we have the spoken language. English can be spoken. French can be spoken. Spanish can be spoken. But not only can language be spoken, language can also be written. We can write English. We can write French. We can write Spanish. So what is spoken is also heard. So when I'm talking to you, you're able to hear me. And then what is written can also be read or is eventually read. So then you have this cycle. I write, somebody reads, especially if you're reading out loud, it's heard. It typically creates a response, and then the cycle starts back over. So writing, guys, is a written language. Okay? Writing is a written language. Speech is a spoken language. Writing is a written language. And we know just languages in general, they have rules, they have standards, they have conventions. We have long A's, short A's. Spanish has a set of rules for Spanish. If you add an A to it, that makes it feminine. That's about all I remember from my Spanish classes. But if you add an A to the end of a word, that lets you know that it's a feminine word. Versus, is it an E? I think maybe an E. I'm not quite sure about that. But different rules dictate how words are formed. We put an ED on a word. We know in English that's past tense. You put an ING on a word. You know that's a continual, ongoing action. You put a EN, it is written. We know that's a past participle or that's a past tense of a word. So language has its own rules, its own standards, and its own conventions. So in a nutshell, what is language? Or by definition, what is language? Language are the words. So here it is. It's the words, their pronunciation, their sounds, and the methods of combining them used and understood by a community. So languages only work when more than one person is speaking that language. I watched the series. I don't even know what I was watching. And they were talking about, I was in my linguistics class. I'm taking a linguistics class. This made me want to be a linguist. And a linguist, yeah, that's right. This made me want to be a linguist, like, seriously, to understand languages. So, this particular part of this teaching. So, in my linguist class, linguistics is what it's called. I'll be a linguist, and I am learning linguistics. So, in this particular class, they were saying, you know, if somebody makes up a language in a movie, could it possibly become a real language? And they were saying it would take so much time for that to actually happen, because I would have to start speaking the language. I would have to teach another generation to speak that language, and then they would have to teach another generation to teach that language, and it would be such a building process in terms of getting that language to kind of be established in the earth or in like a particular community. And we see why, because it's the words, their pronunciation, and the methods of combining them used and understood by a community. So it's not just enough for you to know the English language. It's not just enough information for us to know Spanish and know French. We have to be able to use them and understand them within a set community. And that's where the written language kind of gets fuzzy. Everybody doesn't know the rules, the standards, and conventions of the English language. So that's how come we can create run-on sentences. That's how come we can have comma splices. That's how come we can have incomplete sentences within our written text, because we don't understand words. We don't understand sometimes how to pronounce words, and we don't understand how to put those words together and use them within the community of writing. Maybe you're writing an argumentative essay. Well, how do I put the words and their pronunciations and combine these things to make a paragraph? Let's say our essay is the community. How do I combine these different things and use them correctly so that they're understood by a larger community? It doesn't matter. I don't care where I go in the United States. writing is a language, especially, I mean, if I'm going to a state, a primary state that speaks the English language, which is, I'm a, a community that speaks English, then they should be able to understand what I've written. But the problem is we don't all use the same rules, even though the English language has a set of written rules that are common. We don't use the rules appropriately. We don't use the standards correctly, and we don't use the conventions within the written language correctly. So that's how come our writing across the board isn't always understood by other people in our English language community, in our written English language community, because everybody is not using the same rules, standards, and conventions. That's where your slang comes in. Then, my goodness, we've introduced text message language into our English language community. And so, guys, that's doing a number on the written language community that's already established when it comes to writing, especially in the classroom with this particular generation of kids who don't know how to switch between standard English and then, I guess, text message English. If that be such a thing, I guess we can call it that. I'm not sure. But that's what language is. The words, their pronunciation, and the methods of combining them. And they have to be used. That's part A. And then they have to be understood by the whole community. So one thing this particular broadcast is going to do is give us all a common understanding of the written language. That's one thing Right On can do for us and will do for all of us, is give us a common understanding so that we may use the written language correctly, the correct rules, the correct standards, and the correct conventions of the English written language. Cool beans? All right, so another definition for language is to be audible. So languages are supposed to be spoken. It also means to articulate. So we have to pronunciate and enunciate. Is that right? Enunciate. We have to enunciate, pronounce the words correctly, which can be hard, especially if you grew up in the South. I grew up in South Georgia, so I don't hear it, but when I go other places, people hear my country drawl, I think they call it. I don't hear it. I'm from here, so I don't hear it. And depending on what part of Georgia you're from, it's heavier, or just depending on what part of the country, the United States you're from, you just have a different accent. So I have a southern drawl. So people say I don't hear it because I hear me all of the time, or I hear people like me all of the time. It also means meaningful sound that's produced by the action of the vocal organ. So there goes that motor cortex kicking in again, that part of our brain that is helping our mouths to form the words that we are speaking. Another definition for language is a systematic means of communicating ideas or feelings by the use of conventionalized signs, sounds, gestures, or is that marks? Or marks having understood meanings. Commas have understood meanings. Periods have understood meanings. Exclamation points have understood meanings. If you are a person whose first language is English, or you've mastered the English language and it's not your first language, then you understand what these various things mean. We also understand what this means. We also understand what this means. We also understand what this means. We understand that these are letters that carry various signs that help us sound out words when we get to words that we don't know. We don't have too many gestures in the written form of communication. Not that I can think of that we would consider a gesture, but we do have signs. We have the @ sign. We have the and sign. And of course, these all break down to sounds. These A's, these letters, all break down to the various sounds. Okay? But by the use of conventionalized, they are conventions. They are taught methods of how these things work. So if somebody try to come in and tell us this is the na sound, we like, no, it's not. Why? We've been taught the convention of what this sounds like in the English language. Does that make sense? So that's why it's kind of like a uniformity in, I guess, teaching people how to read, because it's basic information and it has to be the same across the board in order for it to even be considered a language, because remember, it has to be used and understood by a community of people. Okay. All right, so another definition of language, and then I'm going to move on, is a manner of verbal expression, specifically style. So we know in writing, it talks about your writing style. And so this is how come it can do that based off of our definition, is a manner of verbal expression. And then specifically the style in which that verbal expression is, I guess, given to the audience. So we know we have things such as a writing style of an author. And it's different from tone, and it's different from mood, and it's different from theme, and all of those great things. All right, so the origin of this word is from Anglo-French, and it means from langus, or the tongue. So our tongues, language from Latin lingua, and then of course it directs you back to tongue. So languages have to do with our tongue, specifically our lingo, or some synonyms: our lingo, our mother tongue or our native tongue, our speech, and our vocabulary. Some related words: colloquial. I had to take a colloquium class to get my English degree. Y'all, that class was so hard. And he talked about, let me tell y'all what he talked about real quick. Like, it was a class on the history of English, the English language, but it included like a pronunciation and like all this stuff I'm telling y'all. That's what was in that class, like word origins, how we got this word to mean this, and it sounds like this now, but didn't always sound like that. That E didn't always look like that. I mean, we learned all of it. I didn't learn it. Let me correct myself. I did not learn that information in that class. I took the class. I believe that's a D on my transcript. If a C or a D on my I need to look on my that class was so hard, and the professor, he just knew. He knew the information, but it was gibberish, I believe, to a lot of the class. You know, my classmates at that particular time. That class was hard. Oh my goodness. Let me move on, because I'm having flashbacks now. It was just hard to understand what he was saying. I get it now after the fact, but it really was hard to understand exactly what the purpose of the class was. One, because he was kind of like teaching up here, and we were all like, okay, A equals I. You know, we were at like this basic level of understanding. But I needed it for my major. I took it, passed it. I guess I got a C, because it was a major class. I don't know. I need to check my transcript. Guys, that class was hard. That's all I want to say. And another related word, let me move on, is coinage. So this is why we can make up new words. And new words are coming into the English language and other languages, because we can coin new words. So I think that's neat. All right, so writing is written and read. So what we are hearing, especially words, they first have to be written down. And typically they are written down, and then we read them from somewhere. And that the heart of reading is, what is that which is written saying? So in other words, we must understand how the words on a page connect and go together. So how does this, and I'm trying to get a good example. So when you're reading, one thing that goes with reading is the ability to comprehend. Like, you're not even reading if you're not comprehending. You're just calling words and letters off of a page. So if you're not actually comprehending what you read, then you're not a reader. You can read basic. You have an understanding that CAT equals cat. But if the sentence says the cat ran across the street, and you can't tell me the action and what's going on in the story, then you have not connected how all of those words go together to tell me that the cat is moving, if that makes sense. So reading, the very heart of reading is actually understanding how the words on the page connect. How do they go together to get a subject from point A to point B, which is how you're able to understand your longer passages and keep up with maybe your main character in a particular book. So reading, let's see, am I going to go into this? Yeah, I got a little bit of time left. All right, so what does it mean to read? Reading specifically means to call out to properly address by name. So if I read this letter, to properly call it by its name is C. I just read that this is the letter C. This is B. This is the letter A. And guys, I tried to write them backwards so you guys could see them right on your screen, and it worked. It's not the neatest writing yet I've written, but it works. Okay? All right. So it means to also mention. It means to proclaim or proclamation. It means to pronounce. So this is the word read or reading. It means to pronounce, to publish, read, or say. So when we are reading, we are saying what's on the screen, or we are mentioning what's on the page. We are pronouncing the words that are on a page, or saying the words that are on a page. And so it means to, so when we say we're calling out or addressing by name, what are we calling out or addressing by name? What is written on the page. So I am reading what is written, what I wrote. I mean, it's all 2-3 weeks ago now. We're reading the words. We're reading the letters. We know that letters have names. This is the letter C. Letters put together have specific names. So C-A-T is the specific name of cats. And then we pronounce the names accordingly because of the conventions and structure rules of the English language. So we know that A at apple has a long sound and a short sound. Okay? Ooh, we got ooh, O, A, E, I, O, U. We have all of these different structures. That sounded so funny. And pronunciations, but it's based off of the structures and rules of our written language. And again, language has to be used. Hi, Mom. Thanks for listening. Language has to be used and what did I say? I forgot that fast. Understood by a community. So we all understand if we can read what this is, and we use it appropriately. You know, we're not sitting somewhere and trying to spell bug and we put an A in it, because then we know that it changes the word to bag, if that makes sense. Okay? So read also means the act of reading, but it also means to know again, and it means a piece or of each. So at the very heart, the very root definition of the word read means to know. It means to know, be aware of, have knowledge. It means to perceive, be resolved, can speak, be sure, and it means to understand. So you are not a reader if you don't understand what you have read. And guys, I have taught 11 years, and this is the very heart of the problem that we're seeing in the educational field, that kids are able to recall the words and pronounce the word on a page, but they don't have an understanding of what they just read. The cat ran across the street, and you ask them, so what is the cat doing? Why is he doing it? And you keep reading, oh, because that dog, you can't tell me the dog is chasing him, and that's why he had to run across the street, and then he almost got hit by a car. They're not, he a cat? And then you ask him, so what is he doing? Oh, I don't know, Miss Harris. And you're like, okay. You know, it's just like kind of frustrating because they can recall the words on the page. I have had kids who are able to read an entire passage, and you get to the very first question on the page and they can't answer the question. This is the problem of how come, because the very nature of being able to read by definition is to understand. Be sure you can speak and perceive what is going on. And when you can't do that, red flag, you are not a reader. We can't consider these kids literate who cannot read and write with an understanding. It's not possible. You may be a functional literate. You may can be able to read that that's a stop sign, and you may be able to order something off of a menu, but you don't have the comprehension skills that would require or are a prerequisite to say, hey, this person is literate. So we have a generation of illiterate people, not based off of the fact that they don't, that they can't tell you what this is, but based off of the fact that they can't tell you what that is in context. And once those words and those sentences are put together, they don't have a clue as to what the whole picture is. They don't have the critical thinking skills. They don't have the understanding. They don't have the perception to get an understanding. They're not aware of what all of these letters and words and sentences and punctuations mean to them as people, and then just general critical thinkers as readers. This is the heart of the problem of, I think, what's going on with this particular generation. This age, I won't say this generation, just this age when it comes to our students being able to read and what that really means. They can recall, they know what this letter is, but they don't know when those letters get put together with other letters what the whole story is trying to get across to the reader, and that's the problem. So based off of this definition, reading involves in this order. So reading has an arrangement. So reading involves knowing, so having an absolute surety. It involves being aware of, so having an awareness of, that this is and y'all, I'll remember, all of this is happening so fast in our brains. We're not even able to keep up with how fast I can anyway. Science may have a method of being able to keep up with how fast this is going on or being processed in our minds. Reading involves feeling. We bring our senses or we don't bring our senses to the table. And so sometimes we have kids who read and they can't see what's going on in their minds, so they can't answer any questions at the end. 4, we have knowledge. Your schema is what it's called in the education field, what you bring to the table. So if I'm reading a passage about fish, well, I can remember, hey, my dad built some fish ponds when we were growing up. And so I believe one time we went out there and some of them were dead. And then he had to drain the fish and we had to put we couldn't put this fish. You bring all of that to your reading experience. Well, one, if you don't have a whole bunch of life experience based off of these texts you're reading, you're going to get bored easy, which is happening to our students again. They're reading about astronauts and they don't know one. They don't have an interest in science. And so they're like barely reading the passage, or they're reading about New York and they've never been, or they're reading about the forest and a camping trip and they've never been. So they don't bring a lot of schema, a lot of background illustrations so they can form mental pictures in their mind that will help keep them engaged while they are reading. I have a note here that says illiterates don't bring anything to the table, or they may not bring anything to the table. Functional literates bring some things to the table. And there's a range of, you have your illiterates on one end and then your advanced literates on the opposite end of the spectrum. So, and there are some things in between. Functional literates is in between there. Like, being literate is not the final category. You have like your advanced literates, people who love musical literate, science. You can be scientifically literate, which means the sciences, like that kind of thing. I didn't mean to turn up my nose, guys. I like science, but I like this part of science, the research part of science, and probably some experiments or two, but I'm not a science fan. I'll probably be considered, I believe one day I want to be a reading literate, like advanced literate on reading and writing. I think I'm making a new one up. I don't even know if that exists. I'm going to research it and see. All right, so it also means to perceive. So it's in this order. Reading's arrangement. That's what I'm talking to you guys about. 1, knowing, absolutely. 2, being aware. 3, feeling, having knowledge, bringing your background information, your schema to the table. That was 3 and 4. 5, being able to perceive. So this is where our critical analysis coming in, being able to analyze, synthesize, ask questions, and predict as we are reading. 6, resolving, drawing conclusions. 7, you being able to speak. You can discuss what is read. 8, then you're sure again that you are confident in what you read. You are able to analyze it again. And then does it shape, change you, keep you the same? This is kind of where you become sure of what you read in the sense of how is it impacting you as a person. And then you understand. We can tell you understand when you can apply what you have read. So if I give you a problem or some directions, and you are reading these directions, I think we probably all taking that test where it gets to step number 10. It's like, put your pencil down. Don't do anything. Put your pencil down. And we know as teachers or whoever is giving the lesson that you've actually read the handout in its entirety because you applied what was told unto you. So then our writing comes into play about step 7 and 8 when you can actually speak, because we can discuss what we read through a writing assignment, and then we can be sure that it's in you, or that you've learned it, because then you can talk about how it changed you, shaped you, gave you some new insight, so on and so forth. So writing and reading we are only reading these letters. Letters are written, guys. We are only reading these put together when they form other words, and then these words form sentences. Sentences form paragraphs. Paragraphs form essays and short stories and newspaper articles, and so on and so forth. So we can't disconnect, or we can't break down, or we can't separate reading and writing. When we do that, we have a mess. We can't separate the two. It's just impossible to say, I'm going to be a great reader and not have some level of ability to also be that same great writer. It's easier to read because I don't have to sit and write everything that is written, if that makes sense. I have not written all the books in the library. No one person has. But in order for me to be able to read with an understanding, I need to understand the written language. I need to understand that that person wrote a C-A-T and not a C-U-P when I'm reading a particular text. So these things have to be taught, which is what we're going to get into on next week, basic literacy, and how to move from basic literacy to immediate literacy, from immediate literacy to disciplined literacy. And I'm excited about that. This particular part of the series, I was just really trying to convey to you guys how the brain is processing the information that we are speaking. Remember, we talked about that the Broca's area, which is in our cerebrum, just a quick catch up, which contains our frontal lobe. Remember, we have been talking about the brain is able to bring information to the forefront of our mind. Guys, that part of our mind is called the frontal lobe. And this particular frontal lobe enables us to speak and write. And so then we know that speech and writing, they are both considered languages. You have your spoken language and you have your written language. And how we speak is different than how we write. So English has a written language, and we know just as people that languages have rules, they have standards, they have conventions, and in a nutshell, languages are just words, their pronunciation, and the methods of combining them and using them and understanding them within a community. So you guys are able to understand me because you understand the words that I am putting together, how I have combined them to make sentences and paragraphs and thoughts. But you understand them because you are familiar with the English language. And if I was writing, you would be able to understand what I have written or what I wrote down because you understand, you have some basic understanding of English rules, standards, and conventions. So that was it in a nutshell. I know I said a lot. This These first two series have been very, very technical, and I think they just had to be to kind of help see how what writing is, and then of course just to explain to you language, and hopefully I hope you've understood what it means to read. I may come back and maybe reading needs to be a separate series, because we got the brain. So we talked about the brain. Yeah, brain, and then speech. Then speech, just kind of trying to walk you through just in case you're like, okay, you got your brain, you had your speech, then we went from speech to language, and then we talked about language and reading. So I hope this kind of made sense how, yeah. I think it flowed. If you watch the whole thing, I think it flowed. And I may start back with reading. I probably will start back with reading as a part of our literacy once we start literacy on next week. But I have enjoyed this series, and we will, because literacy, one thing about literacy is you got to know these symbols. So it's all going to go together. This is one of those series you probably have to listen to a couple of times if you really want to get an understanding. Just even talking to you guys about it, of course, I'm getting an understanding as I am teaching or sharing with you this particular information. Like, stuff is like it's clicking in my mind, you know, what I wrote down. So that's awesome for me. May not be awesome for you, because I don't know how clear this one came out. It sounds pretty clear to me. I get it. But I've also had this written down, so it's been coming to the forefront of my mind as I'm talking to you guys about it, because I wrote it down. See? These are my notes. I have notes for these videos. I'm winging it, just in the sense of I don't rehearse what I'm going to say before I get on. I like that level of freestyle abilities. So yeah, I just read what I wrote. Yay, I did the method. I used my own teachings, and hopefully you will too. So thank you so much for joining us for this particular series of Writes On Consulting Agency Say It Right Sundays. We are still in our It Is Written series, and we just discussed the brain, how our cerebrum, this area to here, is the largest part of our brains, and it contains 4 lobes, and one of those lobes is the frontal lobe, which is this particular part of our brains which controls language. And we talked about how our brain is preparing to speak what we write down. It is organizing the sounds of what we write down. Like, it's creating its own script. Let me read y'all that, because I just think that's amazing. The Broca's area may be writing the script, organizing the strings of sounds that express our written thoughts. So that's how come we are struggling readers. They don't even know these sounds, so our brains are struggling to string them together for us, because individuals don't know these particular sounds. So I admonish us, if we want to be better speakers, then we need to become better writers. If we are trying to teach somebody to speak, then we need to get them to writing, because the brain is going to do its parts to string those sounds together. So that was kind of the heart of the message. And then we went into exactly what is speech. We talked about what is language. Then we talked about how reading and language and writing go together. So I hope it was clear. I don't usually go back and watch the videos. I have, but I think I may go back and watch this one, and then maybe do a video. I may do another video this week, just to kind of maybe go back and hit some of these points. Guys, if I don't come on Wednesday, don't freak out. I may come on either Tuesday. No, I can come on Wednesday at 6:15. I'll have time. So I'll do my recap Wednesday. I probably will go back and watch this video just to kind of see how it felt to me just listening, and see if there's anything I need to clarify. And then I'll clarify in Wednesday's video. So that sounds pretty good to me. Look for this to hit your timelines again on Friday, and I may repost it again tomorrow, just so people can see it before Wednesday. And then look for part 3, which is basic literacy, starting on next week. Please go back and look at the graphics for this particular series. They look really good in my opinion, and I think you guys will like them as well. I will probably repost them throughout the week just in case anyone missed the video, so that you guys can see them and just kind of be aware of what's going on in our brains when we actually write. So thank you for joining me for The Brain as a part of our It Is Written series. We are on series 3. This was part 2, and I will, if I don't see you guys Wednesday, I'm putting it out here now, I may not be able to get on Wednesday, but I will be on Wednesday if I can, and for sure you will see these videos again on Friday. So thanks so much for watching. I will see you guys, God willing, soon. See you later. Bye-bye. Good night. Have a good evening.